All right. Hi, everybody. So just one really quick notice before we get started. We're going to be recording today's session. So your camera is not displaying anything, so you won't be on the screen, but we did want to make you aware that Big Brother is watching. So if that's a problem, now is your time to run away. So if we could go ahead and start the recording now. All good. Thank you. Hello and guten Tag to everyone. Welcome to the very first in our new digital series on digital think tanking in the times of COVID-19. My name is Joe Miller. I'm the director of the Washington, D.C. studio of Soapbox, and I have the pleasure of getting to chair today's event. So I'm really excited to be part of this, this new series. So we're bringing together three pretty amazing communities of think tankers from Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States today. And we have three, in my opinion, equally wonderful sponsors for our event. So I'm flattered to be here as a representative of two of those different groups, WonkComms and Soapbox. So I've been involved with WonkComms since somewhere around 2013, I think, so shortly after the group kicked off. For those of you who aren't familiar yet with WonkComms, it's a community of practice for people who work in communications for organizations that work in, around research and policy. So largely think tankers, but also people in universities and so forth who do policy research work. The group's been active in the UK for about 8 years now. Its counterpart here in the US is a little bit newer, but has been pretty active over the last year or so. Last year, I was privileged to join Soapbox to help launch its presence here in Washington, DC. Soapbox is a design studio specializing in working with people who use research and evidence and ideas to make the world a more peaceful, prosperous, just, equitable, and sustainable place, which is to say our clients are people just like all of you watching this event today. And today we're joined by the German Council on Foreign Relations, whose Impact and Innovation Lab has been bringing together think tankers and policy researchers kind of around Germany and building its own community of practice. So it's very exciting because we're finally pulling these groups all together into one big kind of international community. So it's a particularly exciting bit for us. So if we could click to the next slide. Today we're going to kick off our series by talking about bringing face-to-face events online. So how do we do virtual policy events and online meetings? So I'm going to come back and talk about that in just a minute. But for right now, I'd like to, if we could go to the next slide, just do a couple little quick housekeeping things. Probably at this point, everybody here is pretty familiar with Zoom. But just in case not, down there in the bottom left of your screen, you can click to mute your microphone. We've automatically muted all of the attendees today, but it's generally pretty good practice to go ahead and mute your own microphone just in case. If we go to the next slide, you can also switch between a gallery view, which will let you see all the speakers, and then the speaker view, which will kind of highlight the person who is speaking at the moment. You should also feel free to join in the conversation. There are several ways to do that. So if you're obviously sitting in front of a computer right now. So if you would like to live tweet the event, there are a couple of hashtags available that you can use to have a nice little conversation with people who aren't able to be here. We have a Q&A that will come toward the end. So there's a chat function down at the bottom menu of your Zoom window. Feel free to drop your questions into the chat window. We'll be collecting them throughout the talk, and we will get through them in the Q&A session. It'd also be really great if you would introduce yourselves there in the chat window. So just say, who you are and where you're from, because it, one of the great things about these events has always been the networking. So we're virtual, but we can virtually network in the down there in the chat window. Normally we would actually start this by having everybody go around and do a quick round of introductions, but this tells me there are 89 participants in this call at the moment, so that would probably be our entire hour just introducing names and so forth. So we're going to do it in the chat. And finally, we have a couple of surveys for you to participate in. So I'm going to launch the very first one of these right now for you all to be kind of filling in while I am talking. We're just interested in hearing a little bit about what your experiences are at this point. And because we have two really fabulous speakers, they'll be able to kind of incorporate some of this on the fly and make sure that they're hitting the things that you really care about. So if we could pop over to the next slide, please. Let's see. Yes, so why do this? Well, so think tanks have been around for a bit over 100 years, maybe even more than that, depending on how you count them and what the status of a few organizations in the UK might be. During that long history, we've been doing things like writing reports and talking to legislators and holding panel events. And we've been doing it basically since around the time of the Spanish flu. So the last time we had a giant pandemic. At this point, doing a lot of those things is basically part of the DNA of most think tanks. So our community has spent a lot of time over the last few years thinking about how the internet changes think tank reports. So those of you who know me are almost certainly sick of hearing me talk about that particular topic by this point. So if we could go to the next slide, please. What we've not done is really spend much time in the way of rethinking what events would look like across the internet. So when we all started getting locked down, the first questions we were getting from all of our clients were, I have this big event planned, what do I do now that I can't have people together in person? So luckily we have two really great speakers here today to help us start coming to grips with that question. So first up is Claire Luzia. I knew I was going to fumble this, I'm terrible at names. Claire Leifert, who is head of impact and evaluation at the German Council on Foreign Relations, where she applies her passion for facilitating co-creative processes to innovate for the public good. She's a certified design thinker and adult education trainer. And this particular COVID-19 crisis has really cemented her conviction in the importance of think tank work in thinking about what's going to happen next, what the world is going to look like post-crisis. And I can tell you personally, I had the pleasure of hearing Claire give kind of a longer version of this talk a couple of weeks ago, and I can promise you that you all are in for a real treat today. Next up, we will have my colleague, Johanna Schwartz, who is one of the directors of Soapbox and heads up our film and animation department. She has produced documentaries for British television for about 15 years and is also the director of the award-winning documentary, They Will Have to Kill Us First, Malian Music in Exile. Johanna currently splits her time in thirds between Soapbox, the Financial Times, where she is a creative director, and working on her own independent feature-length documentary film. So I'm going to now stop talking because you're not here to hear from me and turn the floor over to Claire, who is going to talk to us about how we do digital events. So Claire?
Yes, welcome from me as well. I was just wondering, should we, when are we going to learn about the results of the
All right, you do have to do that. Thank you. Nope, I will do it now. We have lots of people who have taken the poll. Let's share some results. They are up there now. Do we have, would you like me to read them out, or? We have a lot of participants. So it looks like most everyone has done panel debates. That was the big winner. About 82% of you have done that. About 76% have done roundtables. Good chunks of you have done interactive workshops and background meetings and lectures. Somewhere between a third and a half have done all of those things. Prior to this, you're actually, this is, I will admit, a little surprising. So a little bit more than half of you had done online events before the current crisis. About half of you, just slightly under half, had never done so. So we're kind of learning on the fly. And in terms of video conferencing tools being used, Zoom is really popular. About 83% of you are doing that. About a third of you on Teams, 15% or so on Skype for Business, and then single-digit percentages on some other things like Hangouts and WebEx and so forth. So, there we go.
Wow. Okay. Before I'm gonna say something about what I wanted to say about bringing events online, I just wanted to say one thing. I'm very happy to kick off this this series. As Joe mentioned, we are going to co-host this series now for a couple of weeks, as long as you're interested in following this and contributing to this. And so it's not always going to be us speaking here, but it's more us taking turns in hosting. And we hope that maybe some of you who are participating now might also like to contribute as speakers to later editions of this series. And the second thing that I wanted to add is that we are very lucky to have Johanna with us today, because as you probably noticed, it's not Julia Suit from the Overseas Development Institute, who was supposed to be here today. She had a death in her family, and so this is a very short notice switch in plans, and we are super lucky that Johanna agreed to help us out today. And especially it's going to be a very interesting angle she's taking with her documentary filmmaking background, which is something that we don't often have in think tank circles as a competency on board when it comes to professionalizing our online events. So I'm very excited to learn from you today, Johanna. Okay, so a little bit about where I'm coming from. I'm working at the German Council on Foreign Relations, which is the oldest foreign policy think tank and network in Germany. It was founded in 1955, and we are very events heavy, meaning that in 2019, we actually had 300 events going on in Berlin and in our regional forums across Germany, out of which only 3 took place online. So you see, for us, it was really a big step when we came into lockdown to actually keep our operations running. So for the past month, we experimented a lot and we learned a lot. And yeah, so this is really, me not speaking as like a long-standing expert in this, but more trying to share what we learned in the past couple of weeks. Of course, we had different events, formats and sizes, from one-on-one briefings to public conferences with 300 plus participants. And in general, it's interesting just for you who are not from Germany to know that political Berlin generally has like a kind of presidency culture, which means that there have been very few online events in general in the think tank world before COVID-19. So first thing I wanna share with you are a couple of thoughts on what we learned about running virtual policy events before, what to do before, during, and after the show. And these are like my top learnings, and as we go, we will probably adjust them as well. The first is really to be strategic. Use this current crisis as an opportunity to not just replicate unnecessary meetings online, but really ask yourselves and your stakeholders, why do you want to call an online event in the first place, and what is needed to make it a success? So this sounds a bit like a truism, but it's really the chance now to cut down on unnecessary events that were just business as usual in many think tanks before. Second learning is know your audience. This is always true. This is true for face-to-face events as well, of course. But when it comes to online events, it's also important to know which platform works for them. Especially government officials are a bit limited because of security concerns. So this is important to know before, and also know their tech savviness. If needed, you can offer some tech onboarding beforehand. Invest more time in preparation than usually. This is because the available digital tools, unfortunately, still limit spontaneity. So it's different from being in a room and just like quickly pulling out like a whiteboard behind you and adjusting and like the setting. It's not really possible. And therefore you have to think through and anticipate in much more detail before the event, what you actually want to happen and what shouldn't happen and what features you need for that. When it comes to time, the opposite is actually of the preparation. You have to invest less time in the event itself. Make it shorter than face-to-face. All of us know that online meetings are more draining. We've all experienced this over the past couple of weeks. So I think the golden rule really from our experience is that no online event or meeting should be longer than 90 minutes at a time. And if it has to go longer, then really take a break, stretch, and then get back together. Another concern that many of us share, we had a conversation before with Joe and Johanna saying that, you know, they would be interested in hearing the European perspective on this. I can speak for the German discourse on like Zoom and Zoom bombing. So this is really a big topic. Data protection, the EU data protection law is a big topic here. How can we all make it happen with online events, make it safe for sensitive conversations? So we found that Zoom and other platforms are far from perfect, but the problem is at the moment you really have to make a choice that's actually an impossible choice between, on the one hand, usability and the features you need, and on the other hand, data protection, IT security. And this is of course a very imperfect situation. Our first aid kit that we communicated to all our research fellows is use Zoom, but use a password and waiting room. And don't allow for screen share of video for participants if not needed. And of course, be transparent about that you record, if you record. And then of course, the final rule for preparation is test. So it's mandatory to do a dry run with speakers. And with very important events, you may even want to offer onboarding for participants before the event, so everybody gets their hardware checked and gets familiar with the chosen tools, so you don't lose time, valuable time at the beginning of the event. So now one way, and this is the way I think many think tanks chose, including us, is to start from the purpose of what you want to do, and then look into what you normally would have done, because many of us have specific deliverables in their agreed with their funders, and there it says maybe, you know, you have to do like one conference and like 2 roundtables in the course of a year, and so we started from these face-to-face settings, and then we're thinking, how could you translate them into online formats? And this table gives you a bit of an overview of like how we went about this. And I'm going to focus on the last 2, the third and the fourth line, because I think that for small meetings and like panel debates, Zoom webinar mode is now pretty well noted and well known. So I think we don't have to dive deep into that. But maybe what I haven't seen so much yet is how to make roundtables and collaborative meetings work, which are more workshop-y, and where many people think it's not really possible to do that online. And we have tried a couple of things that I'm going to share with you that make it actually pretty possible. And also bigger events with parallel sessions, bigger conferences with networking character. These are also event formats that let many people worry now how they can go about this online. And I'm going to start at with this fourth topic. So one platform that we have tried just at the end of March, beginning of April, we were supposed to host the On Think Tanks conference, Think Tanks and Technology, which was which we wanted to do together with On Think Tanks and Soapbox and other partners, but we had to call it off. But we still wanted to use the original date, which people had marked in their calendars. And so On Think Tanks worked hard, and I can really recommend to have a look at this platform, hopin.to, and look at it. It has many different features included in one space. So you can register participants there, you can see the program, the speaker bios, you can have parallel sessions, and what's the best about it, it's good for networking. You have a speed networking feature where you are matched at random with other participants. You can send direct messages to other participants. You can have a coffee room. And the best thing is really people can, like in an actual building, quietly leave a session room and join the one next door, so to say. This is something that other platforms don't offer. And I encourage you to also have a look at the On Think Tanks website. I'm not sure if Erica is here. I think she also registered, communications director from On Think Tanks, and they also published a report on the conference, and I think that's a very good place to look. Going to what to do during the event. Some learnings that we had about virtual facilitation. There's really a premium on good facilitation at the moment. It should always. So this is not really something new, but online, some things are different. Group dynamics are certainly different. First thing, make it easy for yourself. Start the meeting or event when you want it to start. Use the waiting room and just let people in whenever you are all set. But keep an eye on the door for latecomers, because otherwise they'll just stay in the waiting room and never enter. Honor the holy grail of video call hygiene. This means video on, mic off, use the chat. I think most of us have become quite used to that already. Be visual. This is really, like, the third and the fourth are really important to me, because it's really, research has shown that, you know, people can learn much better if they have visuals. Also good visuals stick with people. They will remember your presentation, and also it helps to keep focus. If people see, for example, that you are taking notes live of what they're contributing in the meeting, then they will be less likely to feel like a passive observer and really get engaged. The biggest enemy of an engaging meeting is really the diffusion of responsibility. It's a phenomenon that we know from everyday life. So the more people are on the train, when somebody calls for help, the less likely the person is to get actual help, because people will not feel it's actually them who have to make a difference. So this is really a big problem in online events. People unconsciously take on a passive observer role. To fight this, you have to provide very clear engagement opportunities. If you have a smaller meeting, you can really call people by their names. You can use breakout rooms. This is the best feature ever. I'm going to introduce that soon. And you should, just really get people involved as often and early as possible. Co-hosting, do it together. Whenever you have the chance to grab a colleague to do it together, it's more fun for you, it's more fun for the participants. The change in voice actually helps to keep focus, and also you can share the tasks, because probably you saw by now already there's so many things to take care of in parallel that it's very helpful to have co-hosts as facilitators, but even also tech assistant who might assist with tech problems or monitor the chat. The following 3 points are more specific to the current situation, and they might not be so relevant anymore later on, but maybe still. I think personally, especially if you know the people, or if it's if it's a staff meeting that you're holding, allow for emotions. So we are behind the screen, but we are still humans. We are all in this weird situation together right now, and people have to take care of kids at the same time, and it might just be a lot for people to be at home or worrying about the safety and health of their loved ones. So really, don't try to do it. Don't think that like doing it professionally means to be like very serious and not allowing for emotions. But you can do check-ins, for example, at the beginning and let people share what their situation is. Same thing is also true for fun and humor. They help. It's a really weird time to be alive, and tech problems will occur regardless. So just take it with a grain of salt and just laugh about it. And then also move. I mean, it's really possible also to do energizers. We're all sitting at home too much at the moment, moving too little. Encourage stretch breaks and energizers. And yeah, feel free to do this in your meetings as well. Breakout sessions, I already said, this is my favorite feature. It allows you to break down bigger groups into smaller ones and create like a more intimate conversation and even a workshop style working group. You can see here how you can do it. There's just a small sign in your control panel at the bottom, and if you click on there, then you can decide how you want to assign the participants into breakout rooms. Another way to make, so then they will actually be sent automatically to like, it looks like a call by itself, like a Zoom meeting, but you can decide when to get everybody back in the plenary. Another way that is very good for engaging meetings and workshops is to use collaborative whiteboards. So for example, I really like to use Google Slides, but there are other out there like Zoom Whiteboard, it's integrated in Zoom, also Miro or Mural, Padlet. And here you see, people could actually, you would just send the link to the Google slide that you created. You prepare it beforehand, and then you just send the link that allows everyone to edit and post it in the chat box. And then everybody opens the link in their browser and can actually, work on that slide at the same time and, actually fill in post-its that you might have prepared. Like that, you can even build an open space agenda. So even things like open space is possible to do online. So people could, for example, suggest different sessions, put the title of their session on one of those post-its and their name below. And then, you could see where's the interest by voting in Zoom. And then the ones with the most interest, you could put them here in some kind of agenda and then actually send people to these breakout rooms depending on the interest on which topic they would like to work. Also, what you can do with Google Slides and any of these whiteboards is to prepare templates for people to work in. So for example, if you're working on a project that you want to advance, you can prepare a template or even duplicate the slides for as many working groups as you have. And then people just fill in this slide together, answer all of those questions. So I can do this here now live. And then you see it. And then later on, people can share in the background again what they wrote there, and we can have a look at it. And it's great for documentation because we have it all in there already. Afterwards, after the event, it's really about following up. One idea is to stay in the call after the event as you would in an actual meeting room. You can give participants the opportunity to ask follow-up questions like that. Another idea is also, as I said already, online events really make documentation easy. You can record the event and publish it later on. You can save the chat protocols not to lose out on any interesting comments made by participants. Some digital tools even offer automated transcription. And if you work with slides as we do now, this is also a perfect documentation already ready. You don't have to write it up later on. Also, video conferencing platforms generally help with evaluation. So they will tell you how many people registered, who attended, from which country did they call in. And here it's just important to take data protection laws into account, of course. You can also send out a feedback survey or ask people for feedback in the chat. We will do that later as well. And you can program this survey before the event and then just send it out afterwards. And of course, as with everything, you should plan a follow-up before the event because it may influence your choice of setting. For example, we wanted to be able to record and publish it later, so we decided to do it as a webinar and not as a meeting because it's actually a pain in the ass to watch an interactive workshop meeting later on. I've done that 2 times and I really didn't enjoy it. It's cool for people to participate, but not for later. Okay, and now I'm just going to mention 2 more examples. So up until now, I was focusing on event formats that are based on face-to-face events, translated to online tools. But of course, you can also use this crisis as an opportunity for innovation and experimentation and look to formats that are actually using the opportunities that online tools give you that are different from what you could do in a real workshop setting. One of them is, and I want to recommend this platform to you, it's called Policy Kitchen. It was developed by Foraus, the Swiss Forum on Foreign Policy. It is a platform where you can co-create policy recommendations, and it's you can really go through a process of collecting crowdsourcing ideas from citizens or also from a dedicated group of experts, and then rework them into publishable policy recommendations. And there's an example here from the Open Think Tank network, which is actually currently up and running, so you could still participate in that. Another example is hackathons. I'm sure that many of us who are interested in public sector innovation or policy solutions to the Corona crisis might have seen that in the past weeks, almost in many countries, civil society organizations started in collaboration with governments hackathons to find short-term solutions to the most pressing problems of the Corona crisis. And this is an event format that is possible online, and that can also be used maybe in the future for other problems that are not connected to the Corona crisis. And in fact, we are going at the German Council on Foreign Relations is partnering with the EU versus Virus Challenge that is taking place this weekend. Yeah, that's it from me so far. I'm gonna stop my screen sharing and hand over to Johanna.
You're still muted, Johanna.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. It was saying the host needed to unmute me, but now I'm unmuted. Hello, everybody. Okay, let me go to my screen and present it. So hopefully now you can see my screen. And I'm very happy to be joining you here. Hello, guten Tag. But I only joined this event last night, so I have to apologize in advance for my slides. They're very unprofessional. They're not branded in the slightest. They don't look pretty, and that's really what I'm here to talk to you about, those 3 things. So apologies in advance from me.
We're not seeing them.
Are you not seeing them? You have to.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'll wait. Oh, wait. Hang on. Oh, hang on. Let me share again. It says host disabled attendee from screen sharing. So someone needs to allow me to do that. Oh, these are the aforementioned tech problems, hey?
Yes.
So now you should be able to do so.
Okay, here we go. Sharing. Are we good?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Let me go up to share, present. Okay, so now you should see everything full screen. So there are basically, in my opinion, two roads that you can take to professionalize your online event. And really here we're talking about things like panel discussions, webinars, interviews, events like that. I mean, obviously there's a world of events out there. And for each kind of event, you're going to need a slightly different sort of toolkit. But I'm going to try to speak generally here. And then if people have questions afterwards, we can go into more specifics. The first thing that you can do is brand. Right? You all work for organizations, you all have a brand. That brand has got colors, that brand has got a logo, that brand has got a font. It's a really good idea to try to brand your event so that if people are joining you, maybe halfway through, or even, you know, if it's live streaming on Twitter or live streaming on YouTube, they know who it is that they're watching. The second thing that I'm going to be talking about today is to add what we like to call in my business production value. And really it's just a fancy way of saying, make it look better, make it look pretty. And that's something that my slides here, as you can see, don't have any of. So let me skip down. Let's start talking about branding first, because in a way that's a slightly harder thing than making it look pretty. If you think about the sorts of news programs that you see on television, that's really, I think, the benchmark for how you can brand your events. Think about, they have an intro. The intro has got the name of the event. It has music, has a theme song, da, 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 da. It's got something, and it says shoom, and then presented by, has a host. These are all things that we can do to identify our organization, identify the event, brand the event. So like this one, this is a series of 3 events. So this could have its own brand, and also tell people what's coming up, which is always a good thing to do. I used to work for the Discovery Channel, and at the Discovery Channel, there was a rule. It was tell people they're going to see it, show it to them, tell them they've seen it. And I think that we can actually use that rule for a lot of online events. So we can use all of these things. None of these things are scary. All of these things are available to you. Here we go. I'm going to show you an intro video that we made for one of our clients, Atlantic Council, based in the United States. And they have a new web series that they're calling Front Page, AC Front Page. And here's an intro video that we made for them to show at the start of every event that they do. So all of that, music, colors, font, title. This is just, this is a fake event that I've made up, by the way. This isn't a real thing with the words. But all of these things are things that we can use to help prepare people for what they're about to see. And I just want to show you a couple of features here. So here we have the names, and here we have the title of this particular event. What we did for the Atlantic Council is we gave them a file, an After Effects file, that they taught themselves how to use, so that they could change the names and the title of the event each time. So effectively, all of this remains the same. Atlantic Council, Front Page, boom. This is the bit that changes every time, and they're able to do that themselves. They don't have to keep coming back to us, or to whomever you get to make graphics for you. You don't have to keep going back again and again. It's something that you can do yourselves. And I also want to draw your attention to this here. This is also something that we created for them, what we call a bug, a little bug for the top corner of the screen that's got the name of the event and the hashtag, which, as we all know when we're doing live events, hashtags are a great way just to track the people who are watching it, track questions that people have, comments, etc., etc. So all of that is really great. I'll tell you what else we made for them. Here we go. So we made for them a series of name straps. Now, name straps are something that we use in television a lot, but they can also be used for online events. So here's 3 examples of name straps. We gave them 3 to choose from. Here's the first one. Ooh, European Commissioner. That's very good. Here's another one. Who's it going to be? Same person, but slightly different. So we've basically, within their brand, using their suite of brand colors, we've given them 3 options for the ways that these name straps, oops, no, hang on, that's a different one, can appear on screen. There we go. In addition, we also gave them transitions. So for instance, if we were being very fancy and we wanted to use a fancy transition to go from Claire to me, let's just see, I don't know what page I'm on, but let's see if this is it. No, next one. I'll pause that. Good. Next one. I think it's going to be this one. Sorry, sometimes I'm pressing down and I'm meant to be pressing up. There we go. So that's a fancy transition. So if you imagine that the person is behind, everywhere there's a black screen, you're actually seeing a person, and then whoosh, across the screen, and then you see another person. So this is another sort of fancy way that we can transition. And here's something else that we made for them. For when they wanted to start the Q&A portion of their event, we put, oh, fancy transition, Q&A, and then fancy transition. And we also did that for the summary at the end, the key points summary, fancy transition, key points, fancy transition. So these are all things that we use in television, which we can also use in online events. I think it really helps to brand, it really helps to bring it all together, to make it cohesive. And then at the very end, let's say, I believe this is the outro. Yes, here we go. So we've, thank you. Speakers were wonderful. We love you. And then here we go. As everyone is sort of logging off, here we have a little outro video. And here you can put funders, sponsors, URL, anywhere where you want to send people after this event, because obviously engagement is really important for all of our clients and all of the people that we work with and all of our stakeholders. You know, here's where you can do it. Now, a lot of people are talking about backgrounds. And in this new world of online events, background seems to be the thing that everybody disagrees with. I'll give you my take on what works and what doesn't work, but obviously everything is up to you. So here is a background that we created for the Atlantic Council, excuse me, as part of the series that I've just shown you. We've sort of taken apart the globe of their logo and the little crosses. We made a lovely background. Now, there's two ways that you can choose to use this. You can actually put it in your video itself. You can have it sort of be around you like this, which is what we call in the business green screen. Or you can have it in the background of your entire presentation with you sitting on top in a box like this. Here's some friends from The Late Show. So they have a blue background and then they put the boxes on top. Now, I believe that this works better than having it within using the green screen, merely because the technology for using green screen on Zoom, on Skype, on Microsoft Teams really isn't there yet to make it feel real and seamless. You can always tell when somebody has got a fake background, always. And as the quote that Joe put up earlier for me, my favorite quote is, if you notice your tech setup, you failed. And this is true when I was working in documentaries and television, and it's true here. If somebody notices, oh, that's a nice shot, they've taken their mind off of the content, off of the action, off of the story. And the same is true for online events. If someone is saying, oh, that's a funny background, or oh, that doesn't quite work, all of a sudden they're not paying attention to your content. They're not paying attention to what you've said. You've lost them. Even if it's just for 4 or 5 seconds, you've lost them, you fail. So that's why I believe if you want to use a background, and I do think it's a good idea, it's better for it to sit behind, and then you have a small box on the front where you have your speaker, your shared screen, whatever it is. But you know, it's sometimes less is more with these things. And that's just something that I've learned over the years. You really, really don't want to distract people at all. And finally, the last thing I want to just talk about in terms of branding is when you're doing panel discussions and Q&As and you're working with multiple speakers, not so much for an event like this, but when there's, you know, perhaps more of an interaction or somebody's interviewing somebody else, it's always a good idea to be able to manually control who you're looking at. So today we're manually controlling. So it's me now because I'm speaking. It was Joe at the beginning because he's doing the intro. But there's a number of ways to do this. So here we go. Here's a split screen. This is the little test that we made for the Atlantic Council. We've got our little bug here. We've got our lovely name straps, 2 different kinds, and then we have 2 people side by side. I often think that showing 2 people side by side is it's a useful thing to be able to do if you can get the tech to set up to do it, because you can show noddies. So I can be talking and Joe's like, yeah, that's so interesting. And I've never heard you say this before, I'm sure. And, you know, so on and so forth. And it just, you know, then you can go back to full screen, and then you can go back to split screen, and then you can go back to share. So the more that you can sort of shift around and show different aspects and different setups, we would call them setups. The more you can show different setups, the more you can keep your audience engaged. And even if the content is super, super fascinating, I mean, really, let's be honest, it doesn't take very long for people to go, la, 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 what else is in the room? And, oh, my nails need a, you know, whatever, and so on and so forth. So it's really good to be able to do all of these things. So you may be asking, how on earth do I do this? I've barely mastered screen sharing on Zoom. How on earth do all of these things work? So really, though, when we're talking about graphics, when we're talking about split screens, such as the one that you're looking at now, you do need to call upon some kind of events person, a graphics person, a film person, whether that person be in-house or whether that person be with an agency or a freelancer. I'm sure within your networks, you know people, or you know people who you can call in to do this. And there are quite a lot of people out there. So let me just go to this slide. Here we go. So within, if we're looking at the simplest way to do this, within Zoom and Skype and all of these other programs, there are very simple ways that you can put you know, little boxes like this one at the bottom with some words in. So if you have a particularly techie person on your team who's able to do that, I would say go for it. If you're going to be doing it yourself, there are not a lot of options within these programs. So you don't want to get fancy. You just want to do white, maybe on a gray box or a black box, very nondescript kind of font. Don't try to brand it if you're doing it yourself within Zoom or within Microsoft Teams or within Skype, because it won't look like your brand. There's only like 12 colors to choose from. So every organization is going to be using the same blue and so on and so forth. Just keep it simple. Less is more when you're trying to do it yourself. But if you're able to have an outside, if you're able to have an outside company do this, there are a lot of programs that they will use. There's Manycam, there's After Effects, there's OBS, there's Wirecast. There's lots of programs that they'll have at their disposal to be able to create these things for you. Here is something called OBS Studios, which is something that we're using, which we love a lot. So what this basically is an interface, as you can see here. And your Zoom call or your Skype call is fed into this. And then the techie person chooses who they're looking at. They can choose when to put up the graphics, when to put up the Q&A, fancy transition. They can choose all of those things. Effectively, what they're doing is something that we call in television vision mixing. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more, let's see, about that just here. This is a little thing that I got off YouTube, and it tells you what vision mixing is. I think it's really a useful thing to try to understand what something like an OBS studio does. Let me play it for you. Here's a show we'll all recognize.
A vision mixer works very closely with a director, but to a director, and a vision mixer will cut the camera shots that the director wants onto the screen. With their training, they're here now. Please welcome. This is a vision mixing desk to operate this kind of equipment. A vision mixer is always watching the preview monitors. You're aware of what's on program monitor, but are to scan the previews. You cut with your left hand. These 4 buttons here correspond to the 4 cameras that we have in the studio. So this is the studio. Camera 1 with the auto cue for Claudio's over there. 2, that one there. This one's 3. Camera 4 for Jip. When guests are introduced, it's always on camera 4. That's self-transmission monitor. That's what I'm cutting into people's living rooms at home. On a live show, whichever button a Vision Mixer presses on the Vision Mixing desk will instantly change the picture on your television.
Okay, so that's basically what we're doing with OBS Studios. The person who is actually running that will be looking at the event. They'll be choosing who are we looking at. So camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, camera 4. You easily translate that into participant 1, participant 2, participant 3, participant 4. Each person on their computer has got a little camera where I'm camera 1, Joe's camera 2, Claire's camera 3, and so on and so forth. So that's what something like an OBS Studios will allow you to do. In addition, it allows you to bring up the graphics that were created by your graphics person, your name straps, your bugs in the top corner of your screen, your fancy transitions, etc. So I'm just going to show you now. I'm going to escape out of full screen here, and I'm going to show you a little video that we put together with our editor. This is young David, mein Schatz. He's an editor that we've been working with for a long time, and he did a little test for us to show, which shows exactly how he does it. He's roped his brother in.
Okay, so this is now recording. I'm on a call with my brother Simon. So if this was to be like a sort of front board, lower third setup in full screen, this is what it will look like.
Yep, so here you have your title, which he's done.
So then to my shot, my lower third will pop up on the left.
There he is.
And then it fades off. Then I go, hi Simon, I'm joined here with Simon. Hi, what are you doing?
Hi, how are you doing? This is a test of the video system.
And so on and so forth. I think my internet is a little bit low right now, so I'm just going to pause that there. But effectively, that's what we're doing. What David was doing there is vision mixing, choosing when we're seeing him, when we're seeing Simon, when the name straps come up, when the intro is coming up. Somebody's just manually doing all of those things. So basically, if you create a suite of graphics and you have all your participants there, you can actually start to make it look very, very professional. Okay, so if all of this seems really complicated, I just want to say to you, don't panic. It's a lot easier than people might think. Let me go back to presentation mode. And also, you don't have to do everything at once. So for instance, with the Atlantic Council, we made them that whole suite of graphics. I think for their first event, they used the intro and the outro. People really loved it. And I think for their second event, they're going to add maybe the bug. For the third event, they'll add the name straps and so on and so forth. So it's something that, as with all of these things, you can start small and you can scale up. And as you become more comfortable with the software package, with OBS Studios or Wirecast or whatever you happen to be using, as you become more comfortable, you can just add more and more elements, getting more and more professional, and bringing the brand into sort of a cohesive whole with every event that you do. One thing I just wanted to quickly talk about is editing the event for later on. So for those people who aren't able to come to your live event, it's really worth thinking about doing an editing job afterwards. Or if you don't want to deal with any of this tech stuff, you just want to do your event, but then you want to have something that looks a little bit better later on, you can edit it afterwards. So for instance, within Skype, you have the ability to record the event. I'm sure everybody knows that. But what is interesting is that in Skype, it will record, if you have 4 different presenters, or let's say today we've got 3 different presenters, it will record separate video and audio for each of those 3 people. So that at the end of the event, you have 3 different videos, for one representing each person, one representing each camera, and you can actually take those videos and edit them later. 2 screen, 3 screen, 1 full screen, on a background, not on a background, with the name set, all of that can be added later, and you can upload that event or replace the live stream version on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or whatever. So there are a lot of things that you can do when you're editing your video to make it look even better than the things that you can do when you're doing live. You can edit them in more interesting ways, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. Here is my lovely friend Per, who is recording himself with an iPhone. Now, one of the things you can do to make it look even better later on is simultaneously, as you're filming yourself and having this discussion, today we're doing it on Zoom, you can be recording yourself with your iPhone. Now, the quality of an iPhone camera far exceeds anything that any computer just has built in. So if you are setting up your, let's say your iPhone is here, or it's above you like this, or it's slightly below you like this, you're still able to do your Zoom call or your Skype call with all of your people, but at the same time, you're recording a separate bit of video, which will be much better, and you can use that to edit later. So we can talk more about that later. And I've just done a little like diagram here to show you where the computer can go and where the iPhone can go, but obviously you need to experiment. So the people who are doing this really well, obviously here you have Trevor Noah for the daily social distancing show. I think that they've got it right. I think they do it really, really well. It's not fussy, it's not complicated, but it's beautiful. So here he is interviewing Bill Gates. So here's camera setup 1. Each of these people have a camera on them, and they're also doing a Zoom call. So they're chatting to each other over Zoom while simultaneously recording themselves with a more professional camera at the same time to be edited later. So there's camera setup 1, there's camera setup 2. So when Trevor's talking and Bill's listening, we look like that. Then when Bill's talking and Trevor's listening, we look like that. Oh, look, and sometimes we have them both if they're having more of a discussion back and forth. And I think that works really, really well. Not everybody, when you're editing, has to have a really professional camera. So for instance, here we have Trevor with Fauci. So Trevor's obviously got a quite good camera on him, and Fauci has just stolen away into the corridor of his building with his laptop, which he's holding. And you know what? That's totally fine. You know, we don't have to all have stunning, gorgeous cameras in order for the right content to be coming through and reaching our audience. So here's camera setup 1. Here's camera setup 2. You know what? It's fine. He doesn't like, it's a bit blurry, you know what, it's totally fine. And here's 3 side by side. So I think that's a really useful thing. So when you're actually editing afterwards, if you have the tools to play with, you can actually make something that looks really cool and do some lovely window within window, boxes within boxes. There's really, the sky's the limit. Let's see, what are we going to next? So, so now we're just going to talk a little bit about general directing advice. I'm going to go through this really, really quickly because I'm fairly sure that all of you have been talking to your colleagues about this, you know, how to make things look a little bit better when you're on a Zoom call. Framing, okay? So here's wrong and here's right. You want to be lovely, full screen, too much head, sort of love this bit. You don't want the top of your head to go past the screen. You want to have just like an inch or 2 here. You want to be leaning forwards ever so slightly. If you're leaning forwards ever so slightly, it gives a really subtle indication to your audience. It's very psychological, but it gives them a subtle indication that you're interested in them. So whenever I'm interviewing people for television, I never let them lean back like this. I never let them sit up. I always have them lean ever so slightly forwards. Now, because we're online and a lot of us are sitting at desks, we just naturally do that. We have our elbows, we go on the desk, we're slightly hunched forwards, we're leaning towards the camera. That's a really good thing to do, and we should always do that. So there's a framing do and a framing don't. Here's a little tip. You can put your laptop. Yeah, sorry?
Oh, sorry. We're about 2 minutes away from the end of our hour. So.
Oh gosh. Okay. All right.
Yes,
I'm going to scroll through these things really quickly, and you can ask me later. So.
Okay.
Framing, lighting. Oh, look at that. Look at that. You can blur your background. Here's a nice camera you can buy at the end.
That was fantastic, both of you. So thank you so much for this. I'm going to pop up one last little poll for you all to be working on. I think we can stick around for maybe a few minutes after the hour. I know some of you may have to go, but I think we can stick around for at least a couple of questions and answers. So I'm launching the poll right now. We did have a question one question that came in for Claire. So what is your experience with facilitating processes, so repeated consultative meetings like planning and evaluation, and doing those online? So what's the kind of the combination of tools you use to engage people during and in between meetings?
I'm not sure if I understand this question. I'm thinking, so combination of tools used to engage people during and between meetings. I don't want to advertise for any tools. I think that I mentioned the ones that I personally like to use. I think I would always make it very much dependent on your participants. So I totally agree with what Johanna said in the beginning, that you shouldn't over challenge your participants, that you actually want to have focus on the content and on each other, and do not stress them with too many links and too many tools, which all work differently. So really be mindful of people's pre-knowledge of tool and how comfortable they feel working with them. So this is basically, I think, the first and most important rule, and just choose something that they might already know. That's why I like to work with Google Docs and Google Slides, because people know how it works. If they click on the link and then they go into the browser and they just type in there, and they know that other people can do so at the same time. This is what I like. Also, when you have recurring meetings, I think it's very helpful to always use the same link. So to avoid confusion, in Zoom, you can set up recurring meetings, and this will allow you to use the same link every week, for example, for a staff meeting or a study group or something, because this is really helpful. Less people will get lost or send you emails 1 minute before the show asking, okay, where do I find the link again? Because it's always going to be the same. And yeah, this is maybe some things. And yeah, other tools that I already mentioned earlier would be audience polls, like we are using now, using pads or collaborative whiteboards, yeah, just breakouts. I really think breakout is the key. If you have a bigger group of people, even if it's only 10, you can break them down in 3 smaller groups and really let them work hands-on. And this also creates a more personable atmosphere. I think this is also related to what I said earlier, that people are tend to switch into a passive observer role. And if you want them to engage and be active, then you really have to do so and let them know and engage them in a way.
Great, thank you. Johanna, there were a whole pile of questions kind of early on around just kind of logistics. Lots of people saying things like, this is so cool. How do I do this in Zoom? So I think some of it you may have gotten to, but is there anything extra you'd like to add around, just kind of making this actually happen?
Yeah, so I'll just clarify it a little bit, because there's so much to digest there. So basically think about it in 3 stages. First, you have to get these assets. So you need to have your in-house graphics person, or you need to hire a graphics person, or whoever your agency is, get them to make you these graphics. They'll know how to make them so that they'll work in sort of this sort of setting. So your name straps, your logos, your intros, your whatever. Then you need someone to actually run the event. Now you may have someone like that in-house, or you may need to get a freelancer to do that. That person will have expertise, or maybe they'll do some online tutorials and get the expertise to use a program like OBS Studios, Wirecast, etc., etc. They will be able to basically, they're like the silent host, right? So Joe is the host here today, but if we were doing it with all these graphical lovely assets, they would be a silent host who's actually pressing the buttons like your vision mixer, bringing things in. So it's 2 stages. And I think I was just looking at the comments quickly. Yeah, there are some very basic things you can do within these programs, Skype, Zoom, whatever. But again, they're very, very basic. So if you just want to play around with those and experiment, do. If you want to then go a step further later on, then you need to get someone who understands how to work these or figure it out. And, trial and error, trial and error, trial and error.
I had one. I'm going to just sort of abuse my position as host for a minute and ask my question, which is really for one for each of you, and maybe kind of a nice way to wrap up, which is, what's a kind of a really great takeaway? So the biggest piece of low-hanging fruit. So something that people maybe don't think about as often as they should, but that is easy, that they can do themselves, that will really kind of up the quality of their game. So what would you say is that kind of that thing that you can go back and do tomorrow and say, my event is way better? So Clara, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to repeat myself. I really think it's so important to have a clear idea what you want to achieve with that event, and like really refrain from this urge of like just trying to replicate everything that you would have liked to do otherwise, to now do it online. I think this is really now a window of opportunity to rethink the business as usual, because it's just not possible. And I think this is really a very valuable moment, actually, that we can all use to rethink our communication strategies, to rethink the way we are doing events. And like for me personally, and I think for ThinkTank events in general, we should really we should really go more into the direction of like more collaborative events. I've seen a lot of like lectures and webinars online. They are interesting, but as you know, it's very draining to follow them, and especially if you have several per day, as most of us do. And so really go for more collaborative settings, and it's not hard. The first thing is just to think of some questions that you want people to work on, and then just put them in breakout groups and let them work on that, just the 2 or 3 of them, because also for them it will be create a more intimate feeling, more ownership for the results of your event, because they really feel it matters what they say. And also they will get to know the other people in their working group much better, so they will have a networking effect, which many of us want to achieve. So I think this is really like the 2 main takeaways I would hope to convey here. Like rethink if you really need to do it, and if so, try to make it as collaborative as possible, because people will just disengage otherwise.
Fabulous. Johanna?
I would agree with all of that. And I would also, the low hanging fruit for me would be branding, right? You would never put out a report without your logo on it in your colors. You would never have an event, a live event, person-to-person event, without having some, backdrops or brochure or, something around to brand it. So it's really just about thinking about exactly the same way that you would brand the other things that you do, but branding it here in an online space. So it's branding. And again, if you're not technical or you don't have someone technical in your team, start small, start adding it little by little, scale up later, or ask your agency to help you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you first both to Clara and Johanna. This was fantastic. I couldn't write fast enough to keep up with all of the stuff that I was learning. So I'm glad that I can bug you afterward for more details. Again, we're going to be following up this particular thing with we'll have a blog post that we'll put out on the WonkComms blog. If you're not reading that regularly, you should be. We'll also make the video available we'll post it there as well. So if you had colleagues who missed out and you think, boy, so-and-so really should have seen this, then you can point them in that direction. Also a note that we're going to be doing this every week. Next week, Leonora, Mary, and I are going to be talking about, what are we going to be talking about? Breaking through the noise. So communicating authoritative information in a post-truth environment. And then the following week, we will have Rainier Rudolph and Will Tanner, and possibly another person from the US to be confirmed, talking about how political processes change due to the coronavirus process and what does that mean for our work as think tanks. So come back and join us the next 2 weeks. We'll have, it's going to be great. Glad to have you all here, and thanks again to our speakers and to all of you for taking the time to come out today.
And please feel free to suggest any topics that would be interesting for you, and any speakers or organizations that we should feature in this series. Just put them in the chat box. We will definitely make sure to follow up. And so as you have seen in the invitation, we've only invited for the first 3 events, but we are hoping that we might generate interest beyond that. So let us know what other topics we should cover in the 4th, 5th, 6th event of this series. And yeah, stay tuned. Looking forward also to have you as speakers on board. You can also suggest that in the chat.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week. Right. Bye.
And fill in the feedback survey.
Yes. One last little bit. Thank you, Claire. We do have a little feedback survey, so if you're still hanging around, you can go do it now. Okay, thanks everyone. I think everybody has finished the poll at this point, so I'm going to close it up. There you go. Lots of happiness. Yay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.